Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe here from my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And we're joined once again by Jet, King of Samaria, Aquilonia, and Lord of all puppies, Red Nails. This is what people voted for the next book club podcast story. And I gotta say, it's spectacular. It's every bit as good as people say, although I still kind of prefer Phoenix on the Sword, and I kind of prefer the Elephant Tower, but I did enjoy this. Well, I've enjoyed what I've read so far. We're only going to do chapter 1 because there's a lot of content in chapter 1 to go over. Okay, occasionally these stories start from the point of view of another character. Frequently, the first prologue or chapter part begins from the point of view of either the villain or the love interest, I've noticed. And this is a good formula for Howard because it does a bit of the Sherlock thing of arriving on the scene. He's the stranger that happens upon the crime scene, so to speak. In this case, Valeria is obviously a maiden in the traditional sense. She is also a pirate from the Scarlet Brotherhood. There are songs and ballads sung of her skill, and probably also her beauty. She's just recently left the mercenary camp near the village of Sukhmet. Conan ends up coming up behind her, and Conan very obviously flirts with her. She rejects him immediately. The lady don't protest too much. Actually, in this story, he's really into her. He keeps just touching her hair, her hip, and he just can't
flexing his muscles.
Yeah, he just can't keep his hands off her. I'm serious. So we get the impression early on that he's more into her, but later she's more into him. It's just really funny. I don't mind Valeria in the movie, but she's not as likable as she is in the short story. In the short story, she's got quite a bit of spunk, and she's just such a lovable character. It's Valeria's story more than it's Conan's. And he's followed her from Zarallo, the chief of the mercenaries' camp. Howard kind of predicted the rise of the tomboy character, which has become overdone in the past 25 years. That said, there are stories that pull off the tomboy really well. You look at the Narnia movies, they did a great job. You look at even Tangled. But the thing is, Howard gives her all the traits we're familiar with today, but there's something in his writing that just makes Valeria stand out. Makes her a cut above the others. Part of the lore is that she comes from the region of Aquilonia, which does add to her appeal as a character, because Aquilonia, I find, is my favorite region along with Samaria from the Conan Hyborian age. So automatically she's gaining brownie points with me. The fact that she's a pirate harkens back to Bailet. While I did like Bailet, I find Valeria in here is, for some reason, I like her more. Even though I shouldn't, to an extent, for the aforementioned reasons. That said, Conan, we find out, joined the same mercenaries. Conan was a pirate as well, but his ships crashed into the Shemish shore, putting an end to his pirating career for a while, so that's good. Otherwise, he wouldn't be here for this story.
Captain Conan.
I'm sorry. We also find out that while Conan has been with black women before, he's not really into them as much as he is blonde girls and dark-haired, pale-skinned women. So I guess he's got a couple of types. Red Ortho was the one who tried to make Valeria his mistress. He was the leader of the Scarlet Brotherhood. So she left. They then run into a dragon with a stegosaurus tail and tusks, and I do mean dragon. It's not fire-breathing or anything, but it's a wingless worm, I guess you could say. Rather akin in some ways to Glauron. And so, this is the real initial threat that's put before Conan and Valeria. Now, the dragon apparently can go quite some time without sleeping. Conan probably could escape, but at the moment he's too busy being really into Valeria.
Getting a little handsy.
Yeah. And admiring her courage. She sits on his lap and does not seem to protest too much. The attention. So, yeah, you're treated to a few pages of the two almost necking, while there's a dragon trying to kill them. The two characters don't really have their priorities straight in this story. At least we now know what happens when you get someone as buff as Conan with someone with pretty much the female equivalent of him. He gets really,
heated?
He gets really heated. And Howard almost turns it into a comedy or a really skeevy sketch. She, meanwhile, looks at some apples, which are the apples of Durkata, Durkata being the queen of the dead. Apples of Durkata result in death. Conan sees a city in the distance, discuss Conan's childhood. Well, there's an interesting quote that Conan makes to his childhood regarding Aquilonians. Branches too light for spear hafts and creepers no thicker than cords, he remarked, indicating the foliage about the crag. It won't hold our weight, but there's strength in union. That's what the Aquilonian renegades used to tell us Sumerians when they came into the hills, to raise an army to invade their own country. But we always fight by clans and tribes. Now, obviously, there were Sumerians recruited into the armies of Aquilonia, so I suspect that Conan's first combat experience was as an Aquilonian mercenary, fighting for probably a dethroned king who wanted to reclaim his throne after being driven from it. Either that or some usurper fighting to take the crown of Aquilonia. It kind of reminds of a Roman civil war, the way it's described, and it's a very fascinating bit of dialogue. It tantalizes. It does not leave us with a lot of information, but it leaves us with enough to be curious. And so we then get to the fact that the dragon doesn't have scales, so Conan pierces an apple of Derkata with a lance and lowers it and insults the dragon, only to stab it with this makeshift poison spear. The dragon escapes to try and look for water, it seems. Conan chooses to escape towards the city, and we find out that Valeria actually believes in the god Mitra. That's actually a little interesting. That means it's very likely that where she comes from, it's primarily a region of Hyboria that believes in Mitra. They enter the city to find it empty, or so it seems, with you guys having to stay tuned for next time to see what comes up. But what do you think of this chapter? Now, Conan mentions he's not had any fun time in a while, and this is why he's so heated for Valeria, whom is pretending to protest, but basically decides to sit on his lap of her own volition. She protests a little, but it really seems feeble. So we're almost treated to a rom-com between the two, and it's just such a ridiculous, funny scene. I actually ended up laughing more than anything else because I just found it hilarious.
Yeah, because I wanted to say, hey Conan, survival now, babe later.
Now, Valeria became quite the fan favorite. She went on to become very popular and an icon of hyper female combat competence. It seems that some of the fans regard her as the most hyper-competent fighter in the lore, and she is incredibly competent in a fight. She actually, later you see her in a fight, and she's just a killing machine, tearing through enemy ranks like they're nothing, cutting sometimes one or two men before they even have time to blink, and just dispatching them with relative ease. But that said, she's also a damsel in this story. Before anyone jumps on the wagon of, oh, well, Howard was clearly making a statement about women there, not entirely. Bear in mind, there have been male characters who've basically been damsels when next to Conan the Barbarian, because he's Conan the Cimmerian. No one fights like Conan, except maybe Gaston. But the trouble with Conan in this story, though, is he's more fixated on Valeria, obviously. So we do get the sense that she's very beautiful, but you've actually got almost a semi-lesbian character and a king who both desire her as well. So I guess on the pecking her in terms of beauty, she's probably more beautiful than Baelit, and that's quite the high bar considering Baelit's physical attractiveness. So Valeria's obviously drop dead gorgeous. That said, what did you make of her in here? Very different from the movie.
Agreed, and she's very different from Baelit.
Yes, she's a lot more innocent.
And she does put importance on gold and on her wallet. Baelit may have been a pirate, but Valeria is, I'll reference a few times, okay, how much do you make out of it?
She's pragmatic.
Exactly.
Baelit was greedy. Valeria is just practical. It's not money for money's sake. It's just to survive, to eat another day, and to improve one's lot in life for when she wants to retire. She wants to be taken seriously as though she were a man, but she's not a man. And Howard kind of does this kind of commentary on the future hyper-competent super tomboy of the modern age, it seems. He predicted it was going to come. He both subverts it by making Valeria a damsel, but also inverts it in that he makes her very practical, very pragmatic, and she actually gets a lot of character development. She goes from someone who claims to not want anything to do with love or the opposite sex, the opposite wants nothing to do with men, but you can already kind of see that she is a little curious. By the end of the story, she's learned to fight for someone else other than herself, other than what she wants, and fights to back up Conan and to do the right thing. And also, you can see that she genuinely falls in love with him.
I mean,
it's a bit of a mystery for me, though, how she doesn't carry over into the King Conan era stories. because by the end, she's not really the sort to let him out of her sight. Now, all the love interests throughout these stories have given me the impression that, it might not work out. Even Baelot to an extent. But Valeria, I can actually see it kind of working out. Weirdly, she is one of the female characters who would accept being part of the harem and would accept that Conan is going to go for other girls. I know a lot of people may object to that, but she's pretty accepting of Conan's philandering, because the two have not only formed quite the powerful romance, but a strong friendship between them, so that you get the sense that they're really good friends on top of being basically boyfriend-girlfriend. And so I'm just left with a bit of a certain amount of confusion as to why all the successive authors never really used her as much as, say, Baelot. That's a bit of a mystery to me.
You'd think they'd be much more willing to use her, as there's a lot more to get right about Valeria.
To an extent. Maybe it's that in this story, it kind of hammers the point home that she intends to, whether it's to become his concubine or his wife, and she's willing to accept him going for other women, and, she's willing to accept not being queen so long as she gets a moment with him, like a part of him. That might be what people object to about her. Most recent authors apparently like to separate her from Conan, and I'm not sure I like that, because she has a lot of good chemistry with him. She does snark back. She does kind of put Conan in his place a few times. But on the other hand, she supports him and backs him up when he needs the backup in a crunch, and she often says, like, okay, I'm out of ideas here. What do you think? And you have Conan, well, okay, here's my plan. On the other hand, he backs her up and follows her lead a few times. Well, she's a lot more hot-headed than him. So you've got this really interesting relationship. On the other hand, I do recognize that she's basically female Conan. That might not interest as many people as maybe Baelot might. This first chapter was almost more comedic than anything else. The next few chapters are going to be a lot more serious. Next time we'll do both chapter 2 and chapter 3. Until next time, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Conan and Zenobia smashing their enemies to itty-bitty pieces on their honeymoon.